So you've probably heard me talk about it all through today, because again, this is my favorite talk of the day, and not just because of the penises. It's because pareidolia, it really makes us work. It helps us communicate with each other. It helps us recognize other people. It helps us recognize the emotions of other people, which obviously, 500,000 years ago, very important thing to do. And it also helps us appreciate this lovely thing that we're going to be talking about the rest of the afternoon, called comic books. We wouldn't have them without it. So we're going to welcome right now Celestia Ward, caricature artist, who's going to actually demonstrate a little pareidolia and give us the science behind it. Also, co-host of Squaring the Strange podcast with Benjamin Radford. So Mitch, hit the button, please.
Hi there, comic fans and friendly faces. I hope you're all enjoying the sci-fi talks with a PHI. My name is Celestia Ward, and I'm here to talk to you about pareidolia. That's how you spell that. Everybody misspells it. Pareidolia. And, well, first, a bit about myself. Again, my name is Celestia Ward. I am a hardworking cartoonist and caricature artist, and I'm also co-host of Squaring the Strange, which is a podcast that deals with all sorts of strange things and what we can learn from strange things. And pareidolia is kind of a strange thing. I'd like us to embrace this little quirk of our brains and be glad that evolution tricked us out with such a cool feature as pareidolia. Now, pareidolia is a subspecies of what we call apophenia. And apophenia is seeing patterns where they aren't really there. Like if you're a gambler and you hit red 3 times, you might see that as a pattern. You're on a red streak. Well, it's just noise. There's just random chaotic things happening. But we're built to see patterns in that. Superstitions, like wearing your lucky socks and noticing that your team gets more touchdowns when you have those socks on. That's apophenia. That's seeing a pattern that's not there. Pareidolia is a type of visual pattern recognition where you see faces in places that aren't faces. Basically, it's the tendency to see eyes, nose, mouth, and so on in cloud formations, or the side of a barn, or the burn marks of a grilled cheese sandwich. You get my drift here. So let's go through the basics of pareidolia: the who, what, when, where, and why. Who has pareidolia? Well, I do. Many of you do. The typical neurotypical human beings experience pareidolia. Some humans on the autism spectrum might not experience it the same way that the majority of the population does. And those with prosopagnosia, say that with me, prosopagnosia, the inability to discern faces at all, well, they likely don't experience pareidolia either. What is pareidolia? Well, we covered that. As I said, it's seeing faces in all sorts of places. But it's not just seeing faces and stuff like this. It's also seeing faces and stuff like this. You never really thought that took any sort of special talents to be able to see cartoon faces, but without pareidolia, we wouldn't see that. We wouldn't understand those as faces at all, because when you look at it, they aren't really proportioned. None of these are photorealistic imitations of a face. So cartoonists and comic book artists and caricature artists like me would not have a job if it weren't for the fact that we have pareidolia. Our brain's hypersensitive ability to read things as faces is really, it's not just that we see the faces, we also see the intentions of the faces. These faces, even if it's just a sideways bit of punctuation, we understand an emotion from that mark. We understand an intention. We understand, these comic book characters we see on the page, we can understand that they have feelings and hopes and dreams and fears and aspirations. And if you prick them, do they not bleed? Well, they don't, but we kind of think they do, because pareidolia helps us see them as real faces expressing real emotions. As far as the next W on the list, where is pareidolia? Well, it's everywhere, Padawan. It flows through the universe like the force. No, well, no, it flows through oddly shaped faucets and happy faces. That's where it flows from. And as far as where it is in our brain, well, people are studying that for sure. Researchers using fMRI scans found that pareidolia type faces lit up the same parts of our brain as when we look at real human faces. Places like our prefrontal cortex, our occipital cortexes, inferior temporal regions, and the right fusiform face area. Say all that 3 times fast. Those regions light up when we look at faces. And yeah, that's a lot of places in our brain, but we have a lot of places in our brain dedicated to processing face information because we are a social species. The look on other people's faces is very important for us to know about, whether or not it's a potential mate who might be looking at us a certain way, or somebody with a club who might be about to kill us. We need to know what people are about to do, and reading faces helps with that. So it conveys quite a bit of value in the gene pool. So looking back at the when of pareidolia, other researchers found that it happens instantly. Well, instantly is even an understatement. Our brains see the objects as far more similar to real faces that first moment we look at something. And after about 250 milliseconds, then we process that it's not really a face. So you know what they say, the first impression is what really hits you, right? And our first impression of these pareidolia type faces is that it's a real face. So that sort of sticks with you. Our brains are basically, to quote the same researchers, broadly tuned face detection mechanisms which privilege sensitivity over selectivity. So we have very sensitive face detectors, meaning we're going to get a lot of false positives. We're going to see a lot of things as faces that aren't faces, rather than be super sensitive and only get the right thing and ignore everything that's not exactly like it. So that leads us to the last question of the W's, the why. Why do we have pareidolia? Well, the most trot out example you'll hear is there's 2 cavemen, and one of them sees faces all the time really easily, and the other one doesn't. When the saber-toothed tiger comes at one of these cavemen, the guy who sees faces really quick will see it, even though it's behind some bushes. The other guy won't see the saber-toothed tiger until it's in broad daylight eating his guts. So we tended to come from the caveman who could see the saber-toothed tiger, and that's a pretty distilled down allegory of how pareidolia came about. But I don't think you even necessarily have to stop there. It's not just about predator detection. As I said, we are all very social animals. Being able to process other people's faces from a distance or through shrubbery or in the crowded, dark, weirdly lit hall of a dance club, it helps you see if there's a really cute hottie in the back giving you the eye. Oh my God, look at him, Jessica. He's been staring at you. I swear. Be cool, be cool. So that helps. Basically, it helps people get laid, and it helps people reproduce over the past eons of human existence. And so we have pareidolia. Now, we've been through the who, what, when, where, and why, and now I'd like to take you on a little tour of how some cartoonists use pareidolia, either knowingly or just instinctively. And one of my favorites is Al Jaffe, the Mad Magazine artist who has for decades done the Mad Fold-In. He just retired. He retired at the ripe old age of 99, and Al, happy birthday, Al. He turned 100 in March. So yes, he's being lazy now, finally, in his 100th year. But he produced countless Mad Magazine fold-ins. And if your pareidolia works, you're actively using it right now to discern what the fold-in is going to be when you put point A to point B up there. And of course, it's Mr. Alfred E. Newman, a face that again does not bear any resemblance to a real face when you get down to it, but there it is. And so, not just let me see here. Another thing I wanted to show you guys is that caricature artists actually use their pareidolia. They try and actively use their pareidolia to make sure that they can stretch and exaggerate. And one of the exercises that caricature artists do is we like to try and make a whole bunch of weird squiggles and see if you can make a face out of all these squiggles. Because faces don't necessarily need to be one shape. They can be a million shapes. And if you just want to sort of stretch your pareidolia muscles, go ahead and try this out. You know, it's a fun little exercise. And I'm getting carried away now. I'm getting quiet. And that doesn't make for a good talker. So I see I'm getting lost in these. The true brilliance of caricature, I think, is the fact that you can recognize it as the person it's supposed to be instantaneously. Again, that first 250 milliseconds. If a brilliant, excellent exaggerator of a caricature artist has drawn somebody, you see the resemblance instantly. And then you work out that it's a caricature and it's not proportioned at all like the person it's supposed to be. And that, my friend, is something that I will be studying for my entire life. And I probably will never figure out every aspect of it. But it sure is fun to try. And it's nice just to appreciate this little bit of brain magic. It can tickle our funny bone. And it's something that evolution has given us over the eons. Thank you, evolution. But going back to Pareidolia's functions, it's not a one-trick pony. It's not just about funny stuff. Remember, we were talking about scary stuff. The monster in the closet when you were 5 years old, that was because of pareidolia. Your galoshes and your raincoat may have looked like a scary face because of pareidolia going on in your brain. So other artists have used that aspect of pareidolia to their advantage in making all sorts of big bads that aren't really a clear-cut face. You just see the indications of a face. Of course, I had to bring up Eliath from Loki, just on all of our minds recently with the season finale just coming out. And then we've also got the comic book version of him, very much not a real face, but you know, you get in there and people with pareidolia can discern eyes and a mouth there, even though it's a giant scary cloud with some weird colors. Thank you, pareidolia. We've also got, the MCP from Tron, and I think you saw him earlier really quick, and Dormammu from Doctor Strange, not just the comic book version, but also the cinematic version we saw with Benedict Cumberbatch. And I'd even argue that Sauron from Lord of the Rings stretches your pareidolia muscles a little bit. Because, I mean, it's not a whole face, but everybody sees that as an eye. It's the eye of Sauron, not the weird black shape with fire behind it of Sauron. That's the eye of Sauron. We've got Sandman from The Amazing Spider-Man, and since we're talking about pareidolia, and this is a nice example of this, how it's just shadows in sand, and we perceive it as a face, and we understand it as having intentions. He's thinking about something. He's contemplating existence, or sand, or something. This is reminiscent of a similar face that showed up on Mars several decades ago. In a region on Mars called Cydonia, you can find a collection of rocks that was once called the Face on Mars. And the Viking 1 spacecraft took a bunch of photos. This is one of them, or this is a cropped image of one of them. And remember, this is back when cameras were a bit more limited. Polaroid cameras were fancy. And you didn't exactly carry a really high-tech, amazing camera in your pocket around. You didn't carry it around all day and use it to argue with strangers. This was the best we had, and it was amazing that we can get photos of Mars, but this is what we got. It's very low resolution, and it went through a bunch of processing to get it to even look like this. So people saw this and, of course, immediately thought, we're not alone in the universe. There's aliens. And yeah, there probably are, but this doesn't prove that. This does not prove aliens. But nonetheless, people saw the face and thought, there's nothing this can possibly be except for the statue, a statue, a piece of art of a humanoid face. And after they started seeing that, they started involving another little quirk of our brains called confirmation bias. And as soon as they saw the face, they started seeing other things. Other bits of the sand and areas of Mars started looking like, looks like a buried pyramid, or a wall, or a ruined city, or, you know, decades before that, people were seeing canals. So Carl Sagan, who's, you know, the original gangster skeptic in my book, in his must-read Demon Haunted World, he even has a chapter dedicated to this called The Face on Mars and the Man in the Moon, or The Man in the Moon and the Face on Mars. And so you might be wondering by now, after my whole monologue here, what was the face on Mars? Did we ever find out? And yeah, that's the face on Mars. This is a better photograph by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2007, and had better cameras than Viking 1. And yeah, sort of like Bigfoot disappears when you bring a better camera on your hiking trip. The face just plumb disappears in the face of better technology. And while we're talking about jumping to conclusions because of our pareidolia and crappy photos, don't even get me started on ghost orbs and ghost photographs. There's a lot with that. But we're here to talk about comics and cartoons. So let's jump back there again, and this time moving from faces to some other body parts. There's a delightful little branch of urban legends that deals with naughty bits being snuck into cartoons. And you've probably heard some of these yourself, from the naked lady that's visible for half a second in The Rescuers, to the letters SEX showing up in a cloud of flower petals in The Lion King, or just like Hirschfeld used to hide his daughter's name, Nina, in his little pen work. Other artists have been accused of hiding some not so elegant words in their print work. Now, there's obviously some truth to some of these, because artists and animators are human beings. They're adult human beings that sometimes like to play a little prank, or sneak some adult humor into something. Just look at just about any episode of the Animaniacs, and you'll see that at work. But sometimes we have brains that are good at seeing something that isn't necessarily there. And I swear, with pareidolia, the second most common thing people see after faces is penises. And there's a lot of alleged penises in comics and cartoons. Let's go on another mini tour, shall we? This is the cover for Lobo's Back. Around the early 90s, Simon Bisley, the great Simon Bisley, did this, and oh my God, there's a penis! Hide the children! Save yourselves! Well, I don't know how accurate of a penis that is, or actually, I wouldn't put it in my top 10, but people freaked out and said that Simon Bisley intentionally put a penis in there. He was interviewed later and said, no, it's just a fold in the elbow. You guys are crazy. And even if it is a penis, who cares? Penis is just a body part. And yeah, so he saw no big deal about it, and he certainly didn't intend it. Another artist did the background for The Little Mermaid. He maintained that he did not intend to put a penis there, but people sure saw and identified all the parts of a penis. And yeah, coral, taller than they are wide, spires, undersea castles just have spires that look like penises, if you ask me. But yeah, according to him, he didn't intend it, and people unfortunately saw it anyway. This started an interesting little rumor that the artist who did the background work for this VHS tape cover had just been fired by Disney. And so as his last act of revenge against the giant Disney corporation, he surreptitiously snuck in these penises, and there's no real truth to that. He was just a guy working at 4 a.m. trying to finish a deadline. And you can check out Snopes for this little nugget. It's fun to see the sort of urban legends that rise up just because of potential naughtiness in cartoons. Disney itself is also kind of a easy target because it's just so huge. People like to sort of take pot shots at Disney and see what they can find, and sometimes people get very creative in what they're looking for, and there's a lot of eyeballs on it, so a lot of eyeballs leads to a lot of people seeing things it's maybe not really intended or really there. So you can sort of even mark this all off as a bit of a holdover from a moral panic about comic books that took place in the 1950s, thanks to this guy, Frederick Wertham. He wrote a book called The Seduction of the Innocent. And he thought comic books were the root of all evil, and they were going to turn your kids into sex-crazed delinquent criminals, or possibly even a communist. And he really painted comics as something that we should highly regulate or get rid of completely. And unfortunately, there was a lot of fallout from that. There was a panel formed, a Senate subcommittee on juvenile delinquency, to educate people about how bad comics were. Frederick Wertham appeared on that subcommittee and testified. And in a really early hit of Goodwin's Law, he stated that the comic book industry was even more dangerous than Hitler. So the media repeated Wertham's claims, and people listened. And many publishers went out of business, and Mad Magazine is the only thing left at EC, or Educational Comics. EC used to have a ton of titles. William Gaines, the head of EC, even testified there. And granted, I'm getting on a bit of a comics history tangent here, and I can't really prove that Frederick Wertham got all hot and bothered about comics because he once saw a poorly drawn laser gun that looked like a penis, but I also can't disprove that either. So there you go. Really, though, it's a fine line because there's a lot of potential in comics. Like you might have artists that are intentionally trying to make things look like penises. You also might have just an unfortunate title that gives a whole different veneer to what you're looking at. If it just would have a different title, you wouldn't be thinking these things. And then there's just cartoons that were drawn with no intention of showing penises, but the audience took things into their own hands and did a little bit of vandalism, and there you have penises. So who knows? But our time is almost over now, and so as a little bit of brain bleach, I would like to go back to Pareidolia in full form and look at a wonderful face, the face of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, on the butthole of a pug. So may peace be with you. For any more ramblings like this, again, you can check me out, Celestia Ward, at all your socials, and then Squaring the Strange is the podcast. So take care, everybody.
All right, skipping the grilled cheese sandwich and going straight to the dog butt. You gotta love it. Thank you, Celestia. Very nicely done. I'm gonna unmute you right now. So yeah, I mean, I saw you answering a bunch of questions in the chat already. Do you just want to verbalize some of those? Because I think those were pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking me to put this together. It was a lot of fun because, you know, it's as any cartoonist will tell you, Pareidolia is kind of your lifelong hobby if you're in the business. And yeah, questions from Stephanie, somebody asked if animals experience Pareidolia, and they absolutely do. I actually, the one academic credential I can throw out there is I graduated from Johns Hopkins and I majored in writing, but I minored in psychology, and that was animal behavior. So I learned a lot of stuff about animal behavior, and oh boy, does it apply to a lot of human stuff too. But an ornithologist, biologist, Nicholas Tinbergen, he did some studies on birds and found that, I mean, a bird will scoop anything into its nest if it looks remotely egg-like, and especially if it's a bigger egg. Again, this goes into the study of exaggeration. baby birds will peck at something that looks like their mother's beak, because that's how they get food, obviously. And if you have one ring on, I forget what type of gull it was, but these gulls have got a black ring on the edge of their beak. The baby birds see it and they peck at it. If you stick a popsicle stick in there with a black ring, they'll peck at it vigorously. If you put 2 rings on it and stick it in there, they peck very much more vigorously. So they are excited by an exaggerated thing, an exaggerated rendition of what they're normally supposed to be going for. So yeah, and then of course the old example of you don't want to lead your horse over a garden hose because he'll rear up and freak out because it looks like a snake. And somebody else brought up cats and cucumbers. I don't know what cats think cucumbers are, but
yeah, because they're not really snake-like. That's what people say, but
yes, I think it's probably something in their flurkin part of their brain that perhaps is an alien species of sea cucumber that is their mortal enemy. I don't know, but
someone go tell Kelly Thompson to write that in the Captain Marvel. Were there any other questions you wanted to talk about? Anybody else have any questions? Go ahead and put them in the chat.
I do hope that scientists and neurologists and psychologists continue studying pareidolia. One of the things that I didn't bring up any really negative or deadly consequences of pareidolia, but of course, I'd like to find out how your emotional state affects how active your pareidolia sense is, because we have a lot of cops who mistake things that are sometimes only slightly gun-like. Like a thing of a bag of Skittles is not really gun-like, but you see a lot of these guys, and I think a lot of them are honest about it. Maybe some of them aren't, but I think a lot of people in the heat of the moment are like, yeah, it looked like a gun at the time. I thought the guy had a gun, but it wasn't a gun. Your brain read it as a gun. And it links into implicit bias and all this other stuff that's really a gigantic.
It's a big mess.
It's a big tangled mess of brain stuff, but studying it more thoroughly can maybe help with training and help us kind of curb those pareidolia tendencies, or just find out how much your accelerated heart rate and a state of fight or flight really plays into that. So
there's a ton of research out there on how our emotional states affect our perception. If you're standing at a hill with a steep gradient, you'll automatically think it's way steeper than it actually is.
I do have a personal anecdote I can share about seeing.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll move on.
Things or perceiving things when you're under a different state of stress. Here, let me see if there's any good questions here. Is there a minimal amount type of facial features that is recognized by human face by neurotypical people? I don't know that it's been put into specifics anywhere. I think there's an Overton window there that has shifted a little bit.
Hold on, I'll do it right now. There, chat. That's about that's a face, even though it's just some squiggles.
Chances are when you first saw that, when that first emoji came out, you may not have read it as a face, but then culturally you came to read it as a face. I think I'd be really curious, but this is an experiment we can't run, but if we could bring somebody back in the TARDIS from 300 years ago and show them some anime, would they recognize it as faces? Would they not be culturally acculturated to see it as faces? I don't know. Babies respond to 3 dots. There you go. Yeah, exactly. I remember reading about that too. Actually, there's a body of work on how people different faces based on different facial features. Interesting. Oh yeah, I will. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that. Thank you, Daniel Nussdorf.
Nussdorf, who will have very shortly on AIPTcomics.com, will have a review of Julia Galef's new book. So everybody watch out for that. The Scout Mindset, that's called. Thank you so much, Celestia. Again, my favorite talk. So if nothing else, I appreciate it.
All right.